Today I'm gonna show you how to run Nginx Docker container. First of all, in the first 10 minutes, we're gonna run it locally. We're gonna create very simple Docker file, then we're gonna create the HTML page and Nginx config and the config for our website. And then we're gonna run it locally on localhost 8080. And you can follow along. I have the blog post, and also you can find the code in my GitHub repository. The local part will take the first 10 minutes, and then we're gonna continue in AWS. And we're gonna use our self-signed certificate that we created in the previous lesson. However, you can use your own certificates, and we're gonna run it inside the Docker container, but inside the AWS VPC on EC2 Instance. All right, the first section is build and run Nginx Docker container locally. The first thing that we're gonna do is to create the folder. All right, let's create the Nginx folder where we're gonna place all the files, including the website, Docker file, and Nginx configuration. All right, let's create the Nginx folder. And well, since we're gonna be running Nginx inside the Docker container, we need to create the Docker file where we define the steps to build the Docker image. However, you can use the original Docker image for Nginx and run it that way as well, but this is going to be the more cleaner way to build your own Nginx based on the Nginx open source image. All right, so let's go ahead and create the Docker file. And Docker file, just the naming convention. You can call it whatever you want, but the naming convention Docker file. And the first thing we're gonna do, we're gonna use the from statement, and we're gonna start with the base Nginx image. And in order to find the latest version, we can go, for example, to Docker Hub. Amazon, AWS have its own public repository, but I'm gonna be using that Docker Hub. All right, so you can go to Docker Hub, you can search for Nginx, and then let's scroll down. You don't need to sign up. You just need to find the version that you want to use. I want to use the latest one, which is 1.19.8. That's the one, mainline. All right, so let's go back to the code and create the from statement. All right, so that means that we're going to be using this particular image as the base, and it will include all the files, everything that this particular Nginx contains. So that's going to be the base. And it's going to be single stage, so we don't need to give it a name or anything like that. All right, so this is the first step. Now, well, let's go ahead and create our super sophisticated website. HTML page. So let's go ahead and create another file. It's going to be index.html. That's by most of the services, this particular index.html used by, well, that's the naming convention as well. And you can call it whatever you want. You just need to adjust your Nginx config later on. We're going to call it nginx.html. And let's create our page. All right, so it's going to be HTML page. And then inside the body, we're going to put h1 tag, open and close, and put our, well, website name, DevOps by example. And that's going to be pretty much all. No JavaScript, nothing, just one single. Well, however, you can include, but just to simplify this lesson, I'm just going to be using one single header here. All right, so this is our website. Now we need to copy this website to our Docker image. And in order to do that, we can use the copy directive inside the Docker file. And we can use the copy command. And that's going to be the index file, which we have locally on our, well, computer, laptop. And on the right-hand side, it's going to be something inside the Docker image. So that's going to be on the left-hand side, the file in our directory, and this is going to be inside. Okay, so in that way, we're going to copy index inside the Docker image. Now let's go ahead and create the very simple Nginx configuration for our website. Let's call it DevOps by example.conf. And let me copy and paste. All right, so like I said, it's gonna be very simple. So it's gonna listen only on port 80, only for IPv4, no IPv6, and the server name will be localhost. So we're gonna be running this locally and access localhost. Also, we're gonna define the root directory. When we're gonna access just the localhost / it's gonna go and find, this is gonna be the root directory. So that's where we place our file inside that folder. And here we're gonna say that this folder is the root directory where it needs to find everything. So if you're not gonna specify index.html and index here, it's not gonna give you this page. So you need to define what would be the like default web page for / for the root. Okay, and that's gonna be the file that will be located in this folder. And of course, we need to copy this Nginx configuration file inside Docker. So let's do that. And we're gonna use the same copy command. Then we're gonna say what kind of file we want to copy, and then the direction, and then the directory where we want to put it. So by default, that particular file will contain this. It already has the Nginx installed, right? And it has the etc nginx conf-d directory, where we're gonna place all custom configuration files. So by default, and I will show you later, it will search for all Nginx configuration files inside this folder, and it will apply them. So that's why we need to put it in this folder. And also, well, that's pretty much enough, but I want to also show you how to rewrite the main configuration file. So let's go ahead and create the nginx.conf. And that's gonna be our main configuration file for Nginx, like the entry point. And let me close this. So it's, like I said, it's default. This is completely default except the last line. So this is whatever comes with the default Nginx, you'll get here. And user and bunch of other stuff. And access log, maybe you would be interested, but I'm not gonna go deep in all those directives and commands, etc. The only part here I updated, that include statement. Included means it will include all other configuration files for Nginx, and that's gonna be the path. By default, it uses the star instead of this, and it will include default and some other stuff. So I don't want it. I know that the purpose for this particular container image, and I want to know exactly what I'm gonna include in my configuration file. So I'm gonna hardcode the configuration file. That's the one. That's exactly the same that we copy pasted here inside the Docker. And I want to say that include only one single file. And it's gonna be predictable for me, at least. I know that I'm not gonna get any surprises. All right, so this is the main config, and this is such as the import inside this config. You can define this block, server block here as well instead of include, but that's just the convention, how you can split your large Nginx configuration files into small files using include statements. All right, and let me close this and DevOps as well. And the last file that we want to copy here is the Nginx config. So that's going to be the local file that we created here, and that's the place, the default place where Nginx will look for that file. All right, and now let's go ahead and build our Docker image. Let me go to the terminal and type Docker images. And I don't have any Docker images right now. So let's go ahead and build it. And well, important part here, you need to change directory to your, well, context where you have all your files. So since we created the Nginx directory, we need to switch to Nginx directory and then run the Docker build and then -t, that's going to be the name of the image, and this is going to be the tag. And the dot at the end will represent the current directory. So for example, in the Docker file, when we say the dot at the end, it will consider this particular folder, root folder, and we'll look those files inside the current folder. Like this represents the current folder where we in Nginx. And let's go ahead and build it. So when we're gonna build it, it's gonna download the Nginx from Docker Hub first, and then copy those files inside it. All right, now it's done. Let me list Docker images. And now we have the open source default base image, and that's the one that we built. It's pretty much the same size since we just copy a couple of the files, but different tag. And now we can, well, run it locally. It's very easy to run it locally. So let's go back. You can run it from anywhere. You just need to use the following command: docker run -p will map the ports. This is going to be your local port on your laptop, and 80 will be inside the container. And we know that by default it's going to run, the Nginx will run inside the container on port 80. And we don't want to run it on port 80 because of the conflicts. You can just pick any random port here and just use that one. Doesn't matter on the left hand side. And here just the image name, and this is the tag which we just used here. And let's run it. And also we're gonna run it in foreground. So if you're gonna add -d, it will run it in background, but we just want to run it in foreground. And all right, so now we have the Nginx running. We can go and access. Let's go to the localhost 8080. And we can see our website, DevOps by example. And that's Nginx, well, index.html. That's exactly what we're gonna get here. All right, that's the first section, how to run the Docker container locally, the easiest one. The second section will be how to run it inside, well, with the SSL certificate and inside the AWS. So in the previous lesson, we generated the self-signed certificate to secure our Nginx. And you can either generate your own certificate, but if you're planning to host your website on internet and other people will access it, you're not going to be able to use the self-signed certificate. You need to get it from Let's Encrypt or from any other provider. But you can still follow this example, just gonna use your own certificate. All right, now let's go back and secure our Nginx. So let's change our configuration for DevOps by example here. So right now it's listening only on port 80. Let me replace this and let's go over it. All right, so let me start with the second server block. And it's gonna listen on port 443 and it will enable SSL. Then we're gonna provide a server name. This is your DNS name. So I'm gonna be using my Apex domain, which is the DevOps.example.io, and then subdomain as well. So I want to use those two domains. Then I'm gonna specify where my certificate located. Later on, I will create the EC2 instance and upload my certificates in search directory. And this is just the path to those files. So in order to run with SSL certificate, you need the SSL certificate, and of course you need the key. So we're gonna put those two files. Also by default, those are default values for this particular version. The TLS security encryption, what kind of ciphers do you want to use? It's well, it's not optional, but you can update based on your security requirements. For example, if you don't want to support TLS v1 or v1.1, something like that, or maybe you want to support older versions of ciphers. Well, ciphers here actually. those are the protocols. So based on your preferences, you're gonna update your protocols and ciphers based on your requirements from the application standpoint. And those are default values. If you just want to run the website, that's gonna be perfectly fine. You don't need to update anything. And here, the same pretty much location, root, and this is gonna be exactly the same thing. So we have the default folder, which is the root, and then the index, which will point to the website that we just created. And the server on the top, since this Nginx container will listen on two ports, on port 80 and port 443, we're gonna automatically redirect any client that will access port 80 or using one of those domains. It will be redirected to port 443 immediately. So all the communications with our server will be secured and through the SSL. So this is just redirect to point to this block, and that's pretty much it. So listen on port 80, the same server names, and just redirect here. All right, the next step is to start working with AWS. So we need to, the next section will be, let me go back to the block, and we just finished the first section. Now, and this section as well, secure Nginx with SSL certificate. Now let's go ahead and create IAM user, ECR, and push this Docker container, Docker image to ECR. All right, let's go to AWS. And let's create the private ECR repository to hold our image. Let's search for ECR, which will be Elastic Container Registry. Let's go there. And then if you don't have any, you're probably gonna click on Get Started. If you already have it, you know what to do, and just click New One. So it's gonna be private. We're gonna call it Web. This is gonna be just our account name, and this is the region. And we're not gonna change anything else, just that. And let's click Create Repository. All right, so now we have the, well, private ECR repository. Also, let's, right now, my assumption that, let me stop this Docker, and you can also see all the logs when we access it locally. Let me stop it. Right now, my assumption that you don't have the AWS IAM user locally configured, and we're gonna configure your user to push your image to AWS. So pretty much we're doing everything from scratch. All right, so let's go ahead and create the group first. That's the best practice, to use the groups, attach policies to groups, and then place your users in those groups. Let's go to the groups, IAM groups, and let's create a new group, and let's call it ECR admin. And it will allow those users to push images. Here, well, we can probably create our own policy, but just to change something, let's gonna use one of those existing policies that AWS provides. Those are existing and provided by AWS. Let's search for Amazon EC2 Container Registry Power User. And well, like I said, you can grab all the commands, all the names from here, from the blog post. And just sometimes it's easier just than type. That's gonna be the Amazon EC2 Container Registry Power User policy that we're gonna be using. All right, so that's the one, and let's select it and attach this policy to our IAM group. All right, so that's gonna be our IAM group with that policy. And let's create the developer user, and we're gonna be using that user locally from the terminal to upload, to push our Docker image to ECR. Let's add, I don't have any users right now. And after this video, I will delete it, this particular user as well. So we're gonna give it only programmatic access, next permissions. And here, the first thing, we can place this either in admin or ECR admin that we just created. And that's the name of the policy. You can give, you can attach some tags but I'm not gonna do that. And let's create that user. When the user is created, you need those credentials. And well, let me download credentials. I'm gonna be using those later on. Let me close that as well. Now, like I said before, one of the prerequisites is to have, for the second section, you need to install AWS CLI, and this is the installation guide if you click on this link for Windows, Linux, Mac, etc. So I already have my assumption that you already installed that AWS CLI. I already have it. So now, well, in order to configure the user, there are multiple ways. You can either use AWS configure, or you can use environment variables, etc. So there are multiple ways how to configure users, and we're gonna be using the simplest one, AWS configure. Now, when we run this command, we need to enter our key ID, which will be, we just downloaded that file. That's the new user credentials file. And let me grab the ID first, go back and let me enter it. The second one is access key, and access key the second. Let me enter it, and default region name. Well, I'm gonna be using this US East one. I believe it's Virginia, right? All right, let me skip, and default output. Those are two optional values. Region probably you need to enter it, but here JSON, just my preference that I want to get output in JSON format. All right, so now we have we configure the user locally. Now we need to upload our Docker image to remote private ECR repository in AWS. And the easiest way to do that, go to AWS and let's go to ECR again. ECR Elastic Container Registry. And this is our registry web that we just created. And to do that, let's click on View Push Commands. And it's gonna give us a bunch of different commands. And let's use the first one to authenticate your Docker client to your registry. And this will only work after you configure the user locally or export environment variables. Let me copy this line, go to terminal, and let's run it. And we can see that the login succeeded. And I believe by default, you can get this temporary token for 12 hours, something like that. Maybe less, but it's not gonna be permanent. So you're gonna need to relogin sometimes. All right, the next step, they saying that we need to build. We already completed the step. Then we need to tag our image with this particular, this is gonna be my account ID and this is the region. So you're just gonna grab this, but instead of the latest, we're gonna use, our tag. So it's gonna be 011. Oh, actually, let me build it. We've never built it, right? So before we're gonna be able to upload it, let's go back. And here we updated this configuration file for our file, but we never built a new image. So if you go back to the terminal and type docker images, we have only one image, the one with listen on port 80. Now let's go ahead and build the second one. Build, and let's just use the second, one at the end, and let's build it. So this 011 will be secured with a SSL certificate. Now we need to tag this image. Let me tag it. And like I said, this command comes from here. So we just need to tag it with our ECR credentials, account and a region. All right, let's tag it. So it's going to be the web, and this is going to be the one that we're going to upload. Let's tag it, and then let's push it. All right, so let's gonna go ahead and push that image, It's gonna take some time. All right, so we uploaded our image. Let's go back to AWS. Let's click close and refresh this page. And we can see that we have our image uploaded. All right, the next step will be create IAM policy and IAM role for EC2 instance. First of all, let's go ahead and create the IAM policy. Let's go back to IAM. Click on policies. And let's create our own policy. And under the JSON, we can enter, well, our custom policy. All right, so it's gonna be here. It's quite long, and you can find that policy down below here. That's gonna be the one. And we need to make some changes here. So the first one statement here will allow the client Docker client to get the authorization token and authenticate with the ECR. The second statement manage repository contents. So, well, it will allow to pull image, and under resources, you can either use star, but I would prefer to grant permission for single repository that we just uploaded, and you can provide it here. So here you need to replace the account ID, and then the web, I guess you're gonna be using the same one and is in the same region, but account ID will be definitely different. And to find out, you can get it from here. So that's gonna be your account ID. All right, and let's click next and review, and let's give it a name. It's gonna be a long name, just following the same naming convention that AWS has. So it's Amazon EC2 Container Service Web Read-Only Access. And let's create the policy. Now let's go ahead and create the role. So, well, if you want to use those roles with the EC2 instances, you need to create the instance profile. But for example, if you, here under role, create role, if you create the role using the console, the AWS will automatically create role and instance profile for you with the same exactly name. But if you're using something like Terraform or CLI, you're gonna need to create those two entities separately. So keep it in mind. So through the console, it's gonna give you both. EC2 instance, let's create the role for EC2 instance. This particular EC2 instance, we select that this only EC2 instance will be able to use that permissions. Let's click next. And here let's select our policy, and we can filter by customer managed policies and select the policy that we just created. Select it, next tag, next review, and let's give it a name. And let's call it pull ECR images and create role. All right, so we have the role now and also EC2 instance profile. All right, so the next step is to create EC2 instance and attach IAM role. Let's go back to AWS console and let's go to EC2. And first of all, like I said, since we're gonna be doing everything from scratch, first of all, we need to create the key pair. And this key pair will allow you to SSH to your instance. There are multiple ways how you can SSH, but this is one of the the most common one. And let's go to the key pairs. And let's create the key pair and call it DevOps, and let's keep it default file format and click create. And it will download the private key locally. So we're gonna be using that key to SSH. And let's go ahead and update the permissions on that key. So let's go back to the download folder. Now we have the DevOps, and we can use, well, we can use the following command: chmod, then the permissions, and then, well, the file. And we're gonna go list again, so we just updated permissions to this, to the user itself, that only that user can, the owner, so this is gonna be the owner of that file, and this user will be allowed to read and write. And right before that, I think this is the group that stuff that allowed to read, and this is the read others. So basically everyone can read it on my laptop, and we just restrict it right now to the only this user. Okay, so now let's go ahead and create a security group. That's kind of firewall in AWS. Let's go to security group, and let's click on create security, and let's call it just web. And for description, we can give allow external access. And select our VPC here, and let's add multiple rules. So the first rule, since you want to SSH, let's use SSH. And here you can either, well, this is not very safe method, but you can use the all IP addresses, all source IP addresses can SSH. Or, well, it's not very convenient, but in this case, you can go get your public IP address and use this public IP address. Or another way, if you have the like Bastion or OpenVPN, you can use those as well. But for simplicity, we're gonna use the all source IP addresses. And we can give description. I would say I encourage you to give the description, but I'm not gonna do that. Then we're gonna allow port 80, which is HTTP, and it will redirect to, well, 443. And same thing, from everyone will be allowed to access it. And same thing for HTTPS. HTTPS and everyone. All right, now we have the security group, and this is outbound rules. We allow all traffic from everywhere to everywhere. And let's create security group. Okay, now we have that security group. And let's go ahead now, create the EC2 instance. Let's go to EC2, and you can go either instances, so click on launch instance, and then we're gonna be using Ubuntu. Let's search for Ubuntu, and let's select the 20.04. Select. The first type is the instance type, and let's use the T2 micro. Here we're gonna say one instance, then network. Oh, well, before we're gonna create this, let me just show you what kind of VPC we have. Let me open it again. So let's go to VPC. Under the VPC, I have one VPC which is not default. I deleted default one and created my own. It's not default VPC. Then I have only one single subnet, which is the public subnet. And the public, because we have the route table, and the default route will lead to internet gateway. So here, for example, we have I created the second route table, which is the public, with that particular routes here, default route to the internet gateway. And under internet gateway, you can find it. Now let's go ahead and create that EC2 instance. Let's go back. And here we're gonna select our VPC, single one. Then we're gonna select the public subnet. And also we need to have the public IP address here, and in this section you need to select enable, and that EC2 instance, when you create it, it will automatically get the public IP address. Let's click add storage, and here, well, let's just keep default. It's gonna give us 8 gig of disk. And let's go back then tags. You can add additional tags and security group. Under security, let's select the one that we created, which we called web. All right, and let's click review and launch. And here, that looks good. And launch. And we need to select our key pair. So that's the one that we created, DevOps key pair. Launch. So it's gonna take some time to create. Well, right now it's in pending, maybe a few minutes, it's gonna be fine. And the next step will be, we're gonna install Docker. So that's gonna be the next step, install Docker on Ubuntu 20.04. Let's wait till it's up and then SSH, let me close this, to that instance and install Docker. And we're almost done. All right, it's running state. Let's go back to the terminal. And let's SSH. And in order to SSH, you need to run, well, SSH. Then -I, you will provide your private key. And we have our private key in the downloads folder. And then we need to use the default user for Ubuntu, and then we need to grab the public IP address from that instance from here. Let me select it, expand, and that's gonna be the public IP address. Let's use that one. And let's SSH to that instance, and let's say yes. And all right, we're inside that Ubuntu. Now let me just quickly, and that's gonna be the following commands here that we're gonna use to install. Let me do it quickly to install it. All right, the first one will be, we just need to update the repository. Sudo apt update. All right. The second one will be to install necessary packages. This one will add the GPG key. And then we need to add the repository, add apt repository with that Docker. Then we're gonna go ahead and again update the repositories. And we need to select that we want to use the, verify that we're gonna be using Docker EC, which is the community edition. EE means enterprise edition. So let's select the community edition and let's install it. And -Y just says that it's gonna apply. It's not gonna wait for output from us to say, yes, I want to install it. All right, now we have the Docker. Let's check the status. Well, let me just show you the command that you're gonna run, which is the sudo systemctl status docker. And we can see that it's in running active state. All right, but you're not gonna be able to use it. Let me show you. If you run Docker PS, most likely you're gonna get permission denied because this user, who am I? Who am I? Ubuntu is not in that Docker group. So in order to be able to use it, you need to add your Ubuntu user to the Docker group. And this is just environment variable, represents exactly the same thing, Ubuntu. Let's add it and let's run Docker PS. And it's not gonna work. And to make it work, you need to log out from Ubuntu and SSH again. And let's run Docker PS, and now it works. Images. All right, the next step is to upload the certificates. let me show you the next step. Well, the next step, the next section is run Nginx Docker container with SSL certificate. We're gonna upload those certificates, and I'm gonna show you how to run it. And we're also gonna create the Docker compose file. Let's go back to our Ubuntu instance, and let's create here. When we SSH, we got to this directory, which is the home directory for your current user. And let's go ahead and create the folder certs, where we're gonna keep our certificate and the private key. And here, well, we can even move, well, maybe not, just let me list all the files in cert. And right now I don't have any. Now, let me move to the lesson. Okay. And well, like I said, in the previous lesson, we generated our self-signed certificates, but you may use your own certificates, which were issued with the Let's Encrypt or any other provider. So since I have those generated certificates, I'm gonna, well, let me list. It's gonna be in the lesson, the previous lesson, which is 0.54, and those are the certificates. So this is the certificate, and this is the private key, and we're gonna copy those and move them, well, copy to the Ubuntu server. And we're gonna be using the cscp command, secure copy command. And that's the command. This is the -i, pretty much exactly the same parameter that you would use when you SSH. You will provide your private key to be able to SSH, and when you do that, then you're gonna, the first argument, that's the first argument, will be the local file that you want to copy, and the second argument will be the remote target. So that's gonna be the user, and instead of that IP address, we need to use our own IP address from that Ubuntu. So that's the one. And then column, and then provide a folder where you want to copy that file. Let me run this command. All right, so we copy the first file, and then let's copy the second, which is the key. It's gonna be the key, right? That's the one. The key. Let's copy that as well. Let's go back to Ubuntu, and let's list the files. Now we have the certificate and the private key in our folder. Well, in the certs folder. All right, now we can actually, that's it. We can run Docker from here. And I'm gonna show you two ways. The first way, we're gonna use the, since we already installed the Docker, we're gonna use the Docker run -d to run it in background, p map ports. So we're gonna map the first port and the second port. So we're still gonna access all the connections on both ports, and we're gonna redirect from port 80 to port 443. Then -v stands to map volumes. So the first argument -v, that's the one. It will tell you map local Ubuntu directory, home Ubuntu certs, to the Docker image. And this part, etc Nginx certs, this is the directory inside that Docker image. And the way we know that, because in our configuration file, let me open it up. In our configuration file, we specify that we're going to be using those certificates, and we place them to those folders. And we need to map local to Docker image, Docker container volume in order to use those. So those certificates will be located locally on Ubuntu, not inside the Docker image. All right, and then we're just gonna provide the image, and let's run it. And well, we need to authenticate, right? So we're not gonna be able to run it right away. And that's and also here, let's go back to AWS console. And we also need to actually, let me show you. So here, let's go to the, let's go to ECR. Let's go to ECR, and then let's go to the private ECR image, and let's click on view push commands, and let's use this command. And let's try to run it. The first command to authenticate. And well, it's not gonna work. First of all, because we don't have the AWS CLI installed. Let's install that. Now let's click yes. All right, so that's the first part. We need AWS CLI. All right, let's try again. Let's copy. Well, let's view push commands, and let's try to do that again. Authenticate. And now we're gonna get, well, it's not configured, and we have the error. And if you even configure AWS, well, what kind of user you're going to be using to configure it, right? So that's one of the problem. You basically don't have any permissions right now from this EC2 instance to access the ECR. And in order to fix that, we need to go back to EC2, click on EC2, and let's go to running EC2 instances. And that's the one that we created, right? And right now, if you scroll down and you don't have any IAM roles, instance profiles attached to that Ubuntu. So that's why you can't pull any images. All right, to fix that, we can click on actions. Then let's go to the security. Let's expand it and let's click on modify IAM role. And now we can attach our IAM role. And that's the, well, technically it's the instance profile. And since we created through the AWS console, role instance profile have the same name. And let's attach and let's save it. All right, now it's saved it. And let's refresh. And let's close this. And now we can see that IAM role, we now have this instance profile that has ability to access ECR images. Okay, so if you're gonna run it immediately, you may still get an error. So sometimes it takes a few seconds to update the cache and all of that. So let's try it. Oh, so now it works. Okay, so the second time we don't even need to configure AWS configure. So since we attached that instance profile role to our EC2 instance, we are able to log in. And now we can pull images and use those private images from ECR. And to do that, let me go back to my previous command, docker run, and let's try to run it in background. And now it has access. It's pulling the web image. All right, and it started it. And let's clear, and then type docker ps. And we can see that we have the one running Docker container. And to verify it, we can go, right now we are running inside the AWS and we have the IP address. But right now we're not gonna be able to verify it's working or not, because in server name section, we specify that the Nginx will only use those DNS records. So it's, if you're gonna use the IP address, let me even show you. So right now, if you go to the HTTPS or HTTP and enter the IP address, so you're not gonna be able to access it. And of course, you're gonna get the error. And this error will indicate that the certificate is not trusted. That's the default certificate. And I'll show you how to fix this. And this is only because of the self-signed certificate. All right, so it's going to redirect and it's going to ignore it anyway. So now we need to create the DNS records. And let's go. I have my Google domains. I have my DNS hosted there. Let me click my domains. Then let's go to the DevOps by example.io, click on DNS, and this, you just need to create your DNS record. Doesn't matter where you host your domain. So you need to create 2 records. So since I'm going to be using those 2 records, I need to create the for Apex domain and then for subdomain. All right, so let's do that. Let's use the IP address, this IP address. Let's enter the IP address and let's use just 5-minute TTL. And that's going to be the A record. Let's create it. Okay, and the second record will be the same IP address, but it's going to be for subdomain, for www. And let's click it as well. Dismiss. All right, now we have those records. And I think we can close this and even that. And to verify those records, we can we use it here, ns lookup. Do you have this command here? Yes, we do. We can use it here. ns lookup. Okay, let me exit. Well, let me use it here. ns lookup. And then I'm gonna use the ns lookup to get my IPs for this domain. And well, I already have the access. And let's check for subdomain. All right, so it looks like it's working. Now I can grab this domain and then go and open new tab, and let's do HTTPS. Well, too many slashes. All right, let's see. All right, so now, well, if you click advanced, high advanced. Okay, so now the problem only because of the that it's self-signed certificate. So you're not gonna be able to, the browser doesn't trust it, and most of all other clients, all other people, for example, who are using and want to access your website will not be able to access it. They all gonna get some kind of error, unless you're gonna use the certificates from the one of the, let's say, Encrypt or any other certificate authorities that are trusted by all the browsers. And this is only because of we are using the self-signed certificate. And in order to fix it, we need to make this browser trust our certificate. Right now, well, let me click on certificate and let me click on details. Click on details, and this is our certificate. And like I said in the previous lesson, this field is depreciated, and the most important fields are the alternative names, those 2. So those 2 have to match your DNS record. And the problem that we are facing right now is because it was issued, this is the CA, Certificate Authority, and it was issued by my own. So in the previous lesson, we generated Certificate Authority, and we use that certificate authority to sign and generate this certificate. And what we need to do for self-certificates, we need to upload the CA to the, well, our laptop in my case. And I'm on Mac, so in order to do that, you can go to keychain on the Mac, and most likely on Windows, on Ubuntu, or on Linux, you can do similar things, but I'm gonna show you on Mac. You just need to upload your CA. You can Google it, how to upload CA to, well, whatever you're using. On Mac, it's gonna look like this. So you're gonna open the keychain, and then you're gonna click on import items, and pretty much you just need to import your CA. And this is the CA that we generated in the previous lesson, self-signed CA. And we just need to import it. Let's click open, and that's the one. And also we need to double click, and then under trust, we need to set it to always trust. And when you close it, it will ask you for your password. All right, now it's trusted. Let's check it. Let's close it and let's refresh it. All right, now it's on internet and well, it's trusted. It's valid certificate. You can see that it's valid. However, it's self-signed, and under details, it's pretty much the same. And well, it's gonna be exactly the same thing if you're gonna use www. So it's gonna just redirect. Well, it's not even a redirect since we don't have those redirects. But if you're gonna use, for example, instead of HTTPS, you're gonna use HTTP. It's gonna redirect to HTTPS. All right, so that's all. And the last thing I want to show you the Docker Compose file. So right now, let's run. Let me just exit and SSH again to our Ubuntu. And then run docker ps. And let's stop it. Docker stop. And then this is our ID. Let's stop that. All right, docker ps, we don't have any, and let's refresh and it's gonna fail, right? So since we're not running anything. And well, when you use just docker run command, you need to provide all the arguments, and I'm gonna show you another way to use Docker Compose. And in that Docker Compose, you also can specify that if, for example, it fails, it can restart it. All right, let's quickly create Docker Compose. Let's use Vim, create Docker Compose, and let's create that Docker Compose. So it's gonna be just YAML definition, and here under the services, we're gonna define the first service and single one. We're gonna provide the image that we're gonna be using. Then we're gonna say if it fails, it will somehow exits the container, it will be restarted always. Then we're gonna map the same ports and volumes. It's gonna be exactly the same thing, but now you can define all your arguments inside the Docker Compose. And to run it, and well, of course, we need to install it. Install Docker Compose. And to run it in the background, you're gonna say Docker Compose up and -d to run it in background. And let's check Docker ps, and you can see that it's running now. Let's go back and refresh. And you can see that it works now. All right. Thank you for watching, and please, if you think this is helpful, subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thanks. Bye.